The neon lights of the city flickered to life as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the bustling streets. In a chic restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown, diners savored gourmet dishes, laughter resonating against the backdrop of clinking glasses. It was the kind of place that oozed sophistication and wealth, a favorite haunt for the elite. At a table near the window, Richard Taylor, a successful businessman in his late 50s, sat with his business partner, Mark. With salt and pepper hair and an impeccably tailored suit, Richard exuded confidence and authority. He scanned the room, his expression a mix of entitlement and boredom. As the CEO of a thriving tech company, he was used to getting what he wanted. But tonight, that desire would collide with a different reality. Across the room, Marcus Wright, a young black waiter in his mid-20s, navigated the bustling restaurant with practiced ease. His broad shoulders carried the weight of a difficult life, but he moved with grace, a friendly smile illuminating his face as he took orders and served tables. For Marcus, this job was not just a means to make ends meet. It was a stepping stone to his dreams of becoming a renowned chef. As fate would have it, Marcus was assigned to Richard's table. He approached with a friendly demeanor, ready to take their order. "Good evening, gentlemen. What can I get started for you tonight?" Richard barely glanced up, his gaze fixed on the menu as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Just water for now," he muttered, dismissively waving his hand. Marcus, unfazed, nodded and turned to Mark. "What about you, sir?" he asked, hoping for a warmer response. Mark, with a sly smile, made a show of perusing the menu, deliberately taking his time. Richard rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed at the delay. After what felt like an eternity, Mark finally ordered, smirking as he added, "And make sure my steak is cooked perfectly. None of that medium-rare nonsense. I don't want to waste my time on anything less than exquisite." As Marcus hurried away, Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. Look at him. Just another kid trying to play the part of a waiter. Pathetic. Mark chuckled, glancing at Richard. "You should show him a little respect, Rich. He's just trying to make a living." Richard scoffed. "Respect? Why? He's just another cog in the machine. They should know their place." The words hung heavy in the air, a palpable tension brewing beneath the surface. Marcus returned with their water, his smile unwavering, but Richard barely acknowledged him, instead focusing on his phone. Frustration simmered within Marcus as he sensed the disdain radiating from Richard. Throughout the meal, Marcus delivered dishes with precision, doing his best to provide excellent service. But Richard's dismissive attitude gnawed at him. When it came time for the check, Richard's irritation boiled over. He pushed the check toward Marcus with a careless flick of his wrist. "Do you always make your customers wait this long?" Richard sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Marcus forced a smile, maintaining his professionalism. "I apologize for any delay, sir. We've been quite busy tonight." Richard scoffed. "Busy? Or just incompetent? You should consider a different line of work." He reached for his wallet, counting out the bills with exaggerated slowness. With a flourish, he tossed a couple of crumpled bills onto the table, a meager tip that barely covered the cost of a drink. As Marcus collected the check, his heart sank. It wasn't just the paltry amount that stung. It was the blatant disregard Richard showed. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, the words laced with frustration. Richard met his gaze for a brief moment, the flicker of recognition lost amidst his arrogance. "Just doing my part to support hard-working people like you," he replied sarcastically, a smirk tugging at his lips. Marcus clenched his fists, fighting the urge to retort. He turned away, taking a deep breath to steady himself. But in that moment, something deeper than anger simmered within him. This was not just a rich man refusing to tip. This was a reminder of the systemic injustices that plagued their society. As Richard and Mark left the restaurant, the door chimed softly behind them. Marcus watched as they walked away, their laughter echoing in the distance. He felt a surge of emotions, a mix of anger, disappointment, and sadness. Little did he know, this encounter would set off a chain of events that would forever alter their lives. Richard grew up in a world where privilege and wealth dictated his worth. Born to a wealthy family in a suburban neighborhood, he was taught that success was synonymous with status. His father, a prominent businessman, instilled a ruthless mentality in him, emphasizing that emotions were weaknesses. Throughout his life, Richard prioritized money and power over human connection, leading him to become a man who viewed others as mere tools to achieve his ambitions. Behind the facade of success, however, lay a man haunted by regrets. After a tumultuous divorce with his wife, who left him for a younger man, Richard poured himself into work, masking his loneliness with power plays and corporate triumphs. He often found solace in material possessions, but deep down, he felt an emptiness that money couldn't fill. His refusal to tip Marcus was not just a reflection of his disdain for the service industry. It was an embodiment of his fears, a fear of vulnerability, of connecting with those beneath him. Marcus, on the other hand, was shaped by adversity. Born to a single mother who worked multiple jobs to provide for him, he learned the value of hard work from an early age. Despite the challenges he faced growing up in a neighborhood riddled with poverty and crime, Marcus possessed a fierce determination to rise above his circumstances. He dreamed of becoming a chef, inspired by the aromas and flavors that filled his home kitchen, and he worked tirelessly to save money for culinary school. However, his aspirations were constantly met with obstacles. Racism and prejudice plagued his path, creating barriers that seemed insurmountable. Working as a waiter was a means to an end, a way to support himself while pursuing his culinary dreams. Yet, every encounter with condescending customers like Richard chipped away at his self-esteem, feeding a sense of hopelessness. The relationship between Richard and Marcus was initially defined by tension and contempt. Richard saw Marcus as a representative of everything he despised, someone who relied on the system without understanding the weight of hard work. For Marcus, Richard epitomized the privilege that denied him opportunities, a stark reminder of the racial disparities that shaped their world. As their paths intersected again, the dynamics began to shift. When Richard discovered Marcus's identity as his long-lost son, the relationship morphed from animosity to confusion. The initial revelation forced Richard to confront his past and the choices he made as a young man. For Marcus, this was an opportunity to understand the man who had abandoned him, to uncover the layers of resentment that had built up over the years. The tension between them evolved into a complex relationship filled with both frustration and curiosity. Marcus grappled with the idea of forgiveness while navigating the emotional landscape of their newfound connection. Richard, on the other hand, was determined to redeem himself, but his struggle with vulnerability often led to missteps. Their journey would test the boundaries of forgiveness, compassion, and ultimately, love. After their first encounter, Marcus and Richard found their lives inexplicably intertwined. Marcus, still reeling from the rejection he faced at the restaurant, received an unexpected call from a number he didn't recognize. It was Richard, seeking to meet again. "Marcus, I know our last encounter was less than pleasant, but I need to speak with you," Richard said, his voice laced with an urgency that caught Marcus off guard. "Why would I want to meet with you? You made it pretty clear how you feel about me," Marcus retorted, a mix of anger and disbelief surging through him. "I know, and I regret how I treated you. But there's more to this than you realize. Can we meet? Please." Richard's tone softened, revealing a hint of vulnerability that Marcus hadn't expected. After a brief hesitation, Marcus agreed to meet, curiosity overriding his anger. They chose a small coffee shop, a stark contrast to the lavish restaurant where their worlds had collided. The atmosphere was relaxed, and Marcus hoped this meeting might shed light on Richard's sudden interest. When Marcus arrived, he found Richard already seated, his expression tense. He wore a look of uncertainty that felt foreign for a man used to power and control. As they sat across from each other, the silence lingered heavily in the air. "I want to apologize for how I treated you," Richard began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I was wrong, and I'm ashamed of my actions. I shouldn't have dismissed you like that." Marcus crossed his arms, skepticism etched on his face. "You think an apology changes anything? You can't just sweep it under the rug because you feel guilty," Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right. I can't. But I need you to understand. I didn't know. I didn't know about you. What do you mean? Marcus asked, his curiosity piqued despite himself. I was young and reckless, Richard admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Your mother and I had a relationship that ended abruptly. I didn't know she was pregnant when I left. I spent years building my life, thinking I was free from the past. But when I saw you that night, I felt this connection. Marcus felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, confusion, and a flicker of hope. So you just decided to track me down because you felt guilty? No, Richard replied firmly. I came because I want to understand who you are. I want to make amends, to be a part of your life if you'll let me. The tension in the air shifted, a fragile thread of vulnerability connecting them. As they spoke, Marcus shared his dreams of becoming a chef, the struggles he faced in a world that often underestimated him. Richard listened, absorbing every word as if trying to bridge the chasm of their years apart. Yet, the conversation took a turn when Marcus posed a question that hung heavily between them. Why did you never try to find me? Richard's gaze dropped, shame flickering in his eyes. I was consumed by my career. I thought I was doing the right thing, but it was a lie. I didn't want to face the reality of my past. I was afraid. Marcus's heart raced as he processed Richard's words. The man before him was a mixture of privilege and pain, a complex figure who had allowed fear to dictate his choices. Yet, a part of him wanted to reach out, to understand the man he had grown to despise. In the following weeks, their relationship developed slowly. Richard made genuine efforts to connect, reaching out more frequently, inviting Marcus to dine with him in less formal settings. They shared meals at local diners, where the atmosphere was unpretentious, allowing Marcus to see Richard in a different light. As they spent time together, Marcus learned about Richard's life, the successes and the failures, the loneliness that accompanied his wealth. They bonded over shared meals, laughter, and even moments of silence that spoke volumes. Marcus began to see Richard not just as the rich man who had insulted him, but as a flawed human being grappling with regret. But beneath this budding connection, tension lingered. Marcus struggled with the feelings of abandonment that had plagued him for years. Richard's attempts to bridge the gap often felt inadequate, reminders of the years lost and the pain buried deep within Marcus's heart. One evening, while sitting on a park bench after a late dinner, Marcus confronted Richard. You can't just swoop in and expect everything to be okay. You missed out on my entire life. You're not my father. You're just a stranger trying to play the role. Richard's expression shifted, pain etched across his features. I understand that. I can't change the past, but I want to be here now. I want to earn your trust, even if it takes time. I don't know if I can give you that, Marcus replied, his voice breaking slightly. You think it's easy for me to forgive? To just forget everything? Their conversation turned heated, emotions spilling over as Richard attempted to express his remorse while Marcus wrestled with his pain. It was a pivotal moment, one that underscored the complexity of their relationship, a relationship built on years of absence and hurt. Yet, despite their disagreements, there were moments of genuine connection. Richard began attending Marcus's culinary events, where Marcus showcased his skills in front of friends and family. Richard felt pride swell in his chest as he watched Marcus flourish, his talent undeniable. As they shared laughter and frustrations, the bond between them deepened. They were two men navigating the complexities of forgiveness, understanding that healing would take time, effort, and patience. But beneath the layers of tension, hope began to blossom, a hope that perhaps they could redefine their relationship, creating a new narrative built on trust and acceptance. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Marcus and Richard began to take shape, but the past loomed large over their heads. Richard was determined to prove himself, but his attempts often fell flat. One evening, while they were enjoying a meal at a cozy diner, Richard broached the subject of his past once more. Marcus, I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. I understand if you're hesitant to trust me, Richard began, his tone earnest. I appreciate that, but it's not easy for me to forget the years you weren't there, Marcus replied, frustration creeping into his voice. It feels like you want to play the part of a father without facing the reality of what you did. Richard took a deep breath, grappling with his emotions. I know I can't erase the past, but I want to be a part of your future. I'm willing to fight for that. Fight for what? A relationship that should have been there all along? Marcus shot back, anger bubbling to the surface. You don't get to just waltz back into my life and act like everything is fine. Richard's expression hardened, and for a moment, the weight of their conversation hung heavily between them. I understand your anger, Marcus, but I need you to understand something important. I had no idea you existed until recently. I never meant to hurt you or your mother. Marcus fell silent, the pain of his past welling up inside him. It doesn't matter now, does it? You still chose to turn your back when it mattered the most. In that moment, the tension reached a breaking point. The two men faced each other, emotions raw and exposed. It was a clash of hurt and regret, an explosion of feelings that had been brewing beneath the surface for too long. Suddenly, a commotion broke out across the diner as a group of patrons entered, laughter and loud conversations echoing through the room. Richard glanced over, momentarily distracted, but when he turned back to Marcus, his expression had changed. Let's step outside, he suggested, his voice low. Marcus nodded, feeling a surge of emotions as they walked out into the cool night air. The street was dimly lit, the city bustling with life. Richard leaned against a lamppost, his brow furrowed in thought. Marcus, I'm not asking for your forgiveness overnight. I'm asking for a chance to prove myself, he said, his tone softening. Marcus's heart raced as he considered Richard's words. There was a sincerity in his voice that resonated with him, but the scars of abandonment ran deep. What if I don't want to give you that chance? Then I'll keep trying, Richard replied, determination flooding his voice. I'll keep trying until you see that I'm not the same man I was all those years ago. I've learned, and I'm willing to change. Before Marcus could respond, Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting. I need to take this, he said, stepping away to answer the call. Marcus watched as Richard's demeanor transformed, the authoritative businessman returning as he spoke into the phone. The conversation was clipped, his tone sharp and demanding. In that moment, Marcus felt a pang of recognition. Richard was still the man who had dismissed him just months before. When Richard hung up, he looked back at Marcus, the tension still palpable. I'm sorry, that was work. I need to. Marcus cut him off. You always need to prioritize work over everything else, don't you? Richard's expression faltered. No, that's not what I meant. I'm trying to balance my life, to be there for you. But Marcus couldn't contain his frustration any longer. You're still that same rich man who doesn't care about anything other than your status. You might be here physically, but emotionally, you're still miles away. Richard clenched his jaw, and for a moment, silence enveloped them. The hurt they had inflicted on each other seemed insurmountable. As Marcus turned to walk away, Richard reached out, grabbing his arm gently. Please, don't go. Just give me a chance, Richard pleaded, desperation flooding his voice. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right. In that moment, something shifted within Marcus. He felt the walls he had built around himself begin to crack. The vulnerability in Richard's eyes mirrored his own pain, a connection that transcended their tumultuous past. Fine, Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. But it's going to take time. I won't just forget. Richard nodded, relief flooding his features. I can wait. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust. And just like that, a fragile truce formed between them, a commitment to navigate the complexities of their relationship even amidst the lingering tensions. As the weeks passed, Marcus and Richard continued to meet, slowly building a connection that felt both fragile and promising. They navigated the complexities of their relationship, each meeting revealing new layers of understanding and vulnerability. One sunny afternoon, they decided to cook together at Marcus's small apartment. The kitchen was filled with the tantalizing aroma of spices, laughter bouncing off the walls as they prepared a meal together. Marcus had always dreamed of sharing his culinary passion with someone, and this moment felt significant. Okay, what's next? Richard asked, his hands covered in flour as he attempted to knead the dough. Marcus chuckled at the sight. Not quite like what you see on TV, huh? Richard smiled sheepishly. I think I've been spoiled by too many five-star restaurants. As they continued to cook, Marcus noticed a shift in Richard's demeanor. He was more relaxed, more present than he had ever been. They shared stories about their childhoods, revealing moments of vulnerability that had been absent in their earlier conversations. Did you ever want to be something else growing up? Richard asked, genuinely curious. Marcus paused, reflecting on his dreams. I always wanted to be a chef. Cooking was my escape, a way to express myself in a world that often felt suffocating. Richard nodded, a look of admiration in his eyes. You're incredibly talented, Marcus. I've seen it firsthand at your events. You have a gift. The compliment warmed Marcus's heart. For the first time, he felt seen not just as Richard's estranged son, but as an individual with dreams and aspirations. But just as their bond began to flourish, the shadows of the past threatened to creep back in. One evening, as they sat on Marcus's couch after a long day, Richard brought up an upcoming business trip. I'll be away for a few days, he said, his voice cautious. I want to make sure this doesn't derail our progress. Marcus felt a pang of anxiety at the thought of Richard leaving again. Will you be gone for long? Just a few days, Richard reassured him. I'll keep in touch. But the reality of their situation hung heavily in the air. The wounds of abandonment were still fresh, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal at Richard's imminent departure. Are you sure this is what you want? Marcus asked, his voice shaky. What if this trip is just another excuse to leave? Richard's eyes widened in surprise. No, Marcus, that's not it at all. I promise I'm committed to us, to this relationship. Yet Marcus struggled to reconcile his emotions. I need you here, not just in words but in action, Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know it's hard for you to trust me, but I'm trying. I want to show you that I'm different now. As the conversation continued, Marcus felt a mix of anger and vulnerability. It's not just about you, Richard. I've spent my whole life learning to survive without you. I can't keep doing this if you keep disappearing. Richard's expression softened, and he reached out to touch Marcus's arm gently. I understand. I want to be there for you, but my job requires me to travel. I'll do everything I can to stay connected while I'm away. In that moment, Marcus saw the genuine effort in Richard's eyes. He wanted to believe him, to trust that this time would be different. But as the days turned into nights, Marcus couldn't shake the fear of losing Richard again. The day of Richard's trip arrived, and the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken words. They stood at the door, the weight of their unresolved emotions hanging in the air. Take care of yourself, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard nodded, the concern etched across his features. I'll be back before you know it. We'll pick up where we left off. As the door closed behind Richard, a wave of loneliness washed over Marcus. He had spent so long building walls to protect himself, and now he found himself yearning for the connection they had started to forge. The days turned into an agonizing blur of silence, each passing moment amplifying the doubts that crept into his mind. But Richard made good on his promise, calling Marcus every evening, sharing stories from his trip, and asking about his culinary endeavors. With each call, the bond between them strengthened, but Marcus still grappled with the fear of being abandoned once again. One evening, as he prepared for a cooking event, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. It was Richard, his voice laced with excitement. Marcus, I've got some news. What is it? Marcus asked, a mix of anticipation and anxiety filling him. I've decided to invest in your culinary business, Richard announced, his tone exuberant. I want to help you take it to the next level. Marcus's heart raced. You're serious? Absolutely, Richard replied. I believe in you, Marcus. I want to support your dreams. In that moment, something shifted within Marcus. The fear that had loomed over him began to dissipate as he realized Richard was genuinely committed to being a part of his life. I don't know what to say, Marcus stammered, overwhelmed with emotion. You don't have to say anything right now, Richard assured him. Just know that I'm here for you, and I want to help you succeed. As they spoke, Marcus felt a sense of hope begin to blossom, a hope that perhaps their relationship could evolve into something beautiful, a partnership forged through shared dreams and aspirations. When Richard returned from his trip, they met at a local cafe, their favorite spot. As they sat across from each other, Marcus noticed a shift in Richard's demeanor. He was more grounded, more present, and it made Marcus's heart swell with cautious optimism. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I want to give this a real chance, but it's going to take time." Richard smiled warmly, his eyes shining with understanding. "I'm willing to wait, Marcus. I want to earn your trust." As they shared stories and laughter, the connection between them deepened. The past still lingered, but it no longer defined their relationship. They were two men learning to navigate the complexities of forgiveness, understanding, and love. With each passing day, Marcus found himself opening up more, letting go of the fear that had once consumed him. He realized that while the scars of abandonment would always be a part of him, they did not have to dictate his future. Together, they began to create a new narrative, a narrative built on trust, understanding, and the possibility of healing. And as they shared dreams, hopes, and aspirations, Marcus understood that perhaps forgiveness was not about forgetting but about embracing the journey together. In that moment, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead would not be easy, but with Richard by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their journey was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus believed that they could rewrite their story, one filled with love, acceptance, and the promise of a brighter future.